slightly out of sync, but
that should be fine.
Should be okay.
Yeah, and the reason why Sumit isn't here is because he's ill, or else he'd be here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no one wants to be seen when they're ill. I get it. Fair enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, so today, theology, religion, God, the whole lot. I've been wanting to do this video for so long because I read this chapter in my Stephen Hawking book. Can't find my book, but it's there somewhere. Oh, it's here. And it's called Brief Answers to the Big Questions. And the first question is there a God?
Yeah.
And Stephen Hawking, you know, him being a theoretical physicist, is an atheist. He doesn't believe in God. And he has quite a simple explanation to why he doesn't believe in God, which I'll explain now. But before we begin, I think we should Hamza, you're Muslim, and Omar, you're Muslim. I'm Hindu myself, so all of us believe in God, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's good that they should know that. But yeah. Wait, Hamza, do you do physics?
No, I don't do physics.
It's fine. You'll probably have enough knowledge. So, you know what black holes are, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, usually what is believed is that as you get closer and closer to a black hole, due to the gravitational pull, you get faster and faster, right?
Mm.
So as you get faster and faster, you travel... It's sort of, you know what time dilation is, right? So
Yeah. So, yeah.
It's sort of you travel slower in time as you go faster because of the certain distance that you're covering in an observer's point of view. It's difficult to explain in English, but it's a thing. So on the principle that where there is almost an infinite amount of gravity, because you're so fast, it's sort of a sense that there is no time to exist. So he sort of relates that to the point before the Big Bang. In fact, it's an idea that there was nothing before the Big Bang. So he uses a scale of time. He expresses that when gravity is so strong, you know, it's a very dense, hot sort of part, like before the Big Bang, right? And because of that, due to the amount of gravity, due to there not being any time before then, because there is no time, an event can't happen when there is no time.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And due to that sort of principle, he says you can't even define a moment before the Big Bang because there was literally nothing before the Big Bang, because there can be no event where there is no time. So he uses that sort of scale of time to say that therefore God can't exist before the Big Bang and so on.
Yeah.
So that's the approach that Stephen Hawking used. I thought it was quite a simple approach, even though he's like one of the biggest sort of theoretical physicists that exists ever. So what do you think about it?
I'm just
do you want to go first?
Okay, fine. Yeah, fine. I'll go first.
Alright, you go first. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, but I mean, what I would say first of all is, how does he know there's no time before the Big Bang? You know, like these are all speculative kind of like claims.
It's science. It's sort of laws of physics, I think.
Yeah, but the thing is, there's different understandings of time. He's just picked the one understanding, which is, you know, that it can't exist before the Big Bang. Well, you know, lots of philosophers have said that, you know, time has always existed. How does he know that time hasn't always existed, but simply, like, the laws kind of break down because of, you know, the fact that it's a singularity and all this. I mean, for me, it's not convincing just because you have to essentially prove that it's like a double-edged sword, right? You have to essentially prove that there's no time beforehand, and he's relying on that assumption to make his argument, which is fine. I mean, if it's true, then it makes sense, but how do you know it's true? Like, it's the same kind of double standard that they hold us to. So, oh, what's your evidence? I mean, I want some evidence to show that time didn't exist, and if that's the case, fine, but because he has no evidence, he's only, because past a certain point you can only speculate. Like, obviously you can't go and see what's before the Big Bang, but I don't know, that's what I think. I mean, Hamza, what do you think?
Well, just a response to your thing, wouldn't his evidence be sort of the scientific principles and laws they use to set up that whole argument in terms of gravity being the thing that stops time from existing prior to that point? So that's like the evidence they're using. The empirical evidence that we have to hand is what is being used to show that time can't exist before the Big Bang, therefore there's no need for a God.
Yeah, you see, that's again another thing, because now he's using the science. So if you've ever looked at the philosophy of science, I don't know if you know what this is, right? So the philosophical kind of implications of science. So there's this idea of the paradigm shift. If you look up someone called Thomas Kuhn, this is what he says, and he says, okay, there's this thing called a paradigm shift. So the ideas of science change along with the time that you're in. So 50 years ago, people would be arguing for steady state theory, or 50 to 100 years ago, people would be arguing eternal, universe. The universe has always existed. There's always been a time, and then just recently, actually, scientists are saying, no, there was a beginning. There was a time at which this universe started, whether that be a big crunch, big bang, big crunch, big bang, or simple multiverse theory. I mean, these things change, so that understanding of his could change in 10 to 20 years. I mean, what's to say that that's the fact and that is true, right? Any scientific discovery or new scientific discovery could point to anything else, really. I mean, for me, it's just not, I don't know, the fact that it's an ever-changing...
It's not
convincing. Yeah.
And it almost seems so simple. For me, my sort of argument, my way of looking at it is that with this argument, you're assuming that God sort of obeys laws of physics, laws of science and stuff. How can you limit an omnipotent being to be following rules? Exactly.
That's also another thing. Who says that God requires time in order to exist? That's also another way to look at it. Like, who says that he's bound by time? If he's,
I think the main crux of the argument is not about the nature of God itself, but rather, is there a possibility that the universe could have existed without the need for a God? So this is before we even get to defining what the characteristics of an omnibenevolent creator is. So I think the argument still holds in that sense, because they haven't defined any characteristics of God or as being omnipotent, etc. Merely it's saying that with these set of rules that we have right now, is a possibility that the universe could have existed without the need for a creator? And they say yes. So even though you are arguing, it's valid as well to say that, well, these rules can change, etc., and these aren't set in stone rules. As it stands now, with that argument, if that argument is sound, then there's no need to speculate into where it could be, because what we have right now is an argument that shows that there is no need for a creator. So, yeah, what do you think of that?
Yeah, no, I was just going to touch on, the argument could be sound, but there's another, that's what I think one problem with it, potentially. But if that's solved, you have to solve yet another problem, which is, why does God require time in order to exist? I think he'd have difficulty answering a question like that, because you believe that God is, post-eternal, pre-eternal, he's always existed. These characteristics that mean that he's essentially created time. So he's before time, right? So
I think the discussion about the characteristics of God and this argument in particular, I think this argument has to precede the idea of characteristics, only because this argument is trying to disprove the existence of a creator, right? So we can't even begin to talk about qualities, because we have to deal with this argument as an isolated isolated discussion, right? Because if you start talking about personalities and characteristics that haven't even been
I get what you're trying to say now, which is you're looking at the creator first and not the properties. Yeah, I get what you're trying to say.
You're kind of looking at the argument itself first before you bring in any other external properties that haven't been proved at all within the sphere of this argument in particular. So in order to counteract this argument, you need to first discuss within the realms of the argument itself. Otherwise we go on tangents and then we don't actually discuss the issue at hand, which I'll go into, because
you see, that's the thing, because when you say God, you've already presupposed characteristics. That's my point. Once you say God...
Okay, then don't say God then. Just say an omnipotent creator. Omnipotent.
No, but we're arguing for God's... I'm looking at from a perspective of a God, right? He's trying to disprove God's existence, not a fairy's existence. Do you get me? So if he's God, you've presupposed his eternality, you've presupposed his omnipotence, etc. So that's already been assumed, and that's why the argument breaks down, because you've basically contradicted yourself. You've said,
but why are we assuming that?
Because that's just what God entails. He's used God, so he's answering the question: is there God or not? Right? And he's arguing from the perspective of theological perspective, the perspective of the religious side, which is a omnipotent, eternal, omnibenevolent, etc., creator. right? And he's using that definition for his argument. He's not saying, oh, a force or, something. He's saying God, and that's why his argument breaks down. If he was saying, okay, even if he was just to say, is there a thing outside the universe? Well, clearly it has to predate time. I mean, the very nature of how the universe came to be means that he predates time. If there's a creator, if there is a something, right? So it's just, for me, because of that, he's like, he basically can't deal with that. You can deal with, okay, fine, science. If we're able to prove that it's true, fine, I accept that. But the property that you've assumed is contradictory to your claim, and that's why it breaks down, I think.
There you go.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. Whatever.
Cool.
So Omar, you were saying something.
Yeah. So we actually continued, but I'm going to just try and clarify again what I was saying.
Okay.
So Hamza's argument is saying that we have to deal with the concept of the creator first before we get into the properties, right? That's what he was saying.
Just distinguishing the argument itself and then the discussion about
exactly. So my response was that once you've presupposed God's existence for the argument, you've presupposed properties, and therefore the argument breaks down. Because if you've presupposed God in the argument, which is what Hawkins has done, then you're assuming that this God is supposed to be eternal or omnipotent, omnibenevolent, and so therefore I would argue that his argument breaks down, because then the God's properties contradicts what you're trying to disprove. Do you understand? It's kind of difficult to explain, but a God is already outside of time. So by saying that, what he's saying in three-step process is this: God, if he exists, is outside of time just by definition. That's the first thing. Second, there was no time before the universe began. Therefore, God cannot exist. So as you can see, the conclusion isn't valid. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So, okay. My response to this this argument, first thing is to establish is that cause and effect does not require time. It's not respective to time. And what I mean by that is, take for example, you're writing a sentence. You had a pen in one hand, and you're writing, I don't know, the cat sat on the mat or something. The pen is the cause. The effect is the words on the page, but they both happen simultaneously. So time is not an aspect that is not a sufficient condition for cause and effect in itself. Yeah. So when you introduce the idea that the Big Bang could have existed outside of time, it still doesn't negate the idea of cause and effect, because the Big Bang is still something that is contingent upon other things. From what we know of the Big Bang, it is still a collection of particles, etc., and that is contingent upon space and time. So you still have this regression of cause and effect. Thus, you still need a necessary cause. And then, long story short, that necessary cause ends up having to be an all-powerful, omnipotent creator, because infinite regression isn't a possibility. I've jumped a few steps, but the essence of it is that you still need a personal cause, personal being, an entity with agency to act outside of time, because the Big Bang alone is still still a contingent thing that is reliant upon its existence is still reliant upon other things. So therefore, you still have this causal chain. Therefore, you still need a cause.
Yeah. No, because that's a good thing to say. Because even if you reject cause and effect, right, and you say cause and effect doesn't exist outside the universe, fine, but dependency still exists. So what I mean by this is things depend on other things in order to exist, right? What he's trying to say, he's basically, look, even if his argument holds true, somehow you have to either believe in cause and effect, and even if you reject this, which is ridiculous, everyone accepts cause and effect. I mean, the only reason to reject is because they will lead to God, right? Right? So even if you reject cause and effect, the idea that the universe is not something that is eternal, it came into existence. Therefore, it needs it's got, like Hamza was saying, particular elements of it show that it's dependent on something else. It's contingent, right? Dependent. And what is it dependent on? Well, something that's outside the universe. And therefore, by extension, you derive that it's got to be some sort of creator. And that's what we call, as humans, God, right? So even then, even if his argument was to hold true, then what created? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Stephen Hawking's is a good try, but it's decent.
Well, I think one interesting thing to bring up here in terms of cause and effect is quantum physics. So one of the things that people say is that quantum physics is an example where you can have an effect without a cause, i.e. something can come from nothing, and that's apparently been observed with quantum particles and the whole like Schrodinger's cat and all that something can be in the state of existence and non-existent at the same time, and people use that to suggest that perhaps things could have come from nothing at the very beginning of the universe if you take into account these laws, these quantum laws of quantum physics, basically. So what do you guys think about that? Danish?
Well, the physics of it, of course, is the way it works is that we imagine these particles being in a probability cloud, and the act of observance causes the particles to end up in a certain place. So out of all these different probabilities, all these different positions and speeds that we can observe these particles to be in, it's going to end up in this one place because of the act of observance. That's what basically the uncertainty principle and quantum mechanics, that's what quantum mechanics is about. And perhaps it can be argued that, the Big Bang could, the reason for occurring could have been some type of quantum changes before, in the state as dense as that, we imagine particles just being protons and neutrons, just areas of charge here and there. They're not full particles, they can't even form atoms, they can't form elements, they can't do anything at such a dense state. So perhaps some type of quantum, I get what they're saying. However, one, we don't actually know enough about quantum mechanics to actually, it's like this, in a area of science so uncertain, you can't create a theory so certain. And secondly, it's difficult to incorporate the sort of particles popping in and out of existence when it comes to the Big Bang. It's sort of difficult to apply that. You get me?
Yeah.
No, as in, I agree. Like, when it comes to this, particles popping in and out of existence. I mean, first of all, like Danush was saying, how do you know there's no cause behind that? I mean, just because you can't see it or observe it, there's nothing to say that there isn't a cause, right? And maybe we could discover this cause 10 years from now, 1 year from now, 1 month from now. I mean, who knows, right? Another thing is, even if that's the case, right, you still have to deal with the fact that there was nothing beforehand. Like, so it's kind of difficult to explain, but even if it's popping in and out of existence, you have to explain why suddenly they remained in existence, and then why they expanded, right? So that's, again, another problem. And also, the third thing I'd say is, again, the idea of dependency. Okay, even if there's no such thing as cause and effect, and that's all nonsense, the idea of dependency still stands, right? These particles are, they're evidently dependent on something else. They can go in and out of existence. They're not necessary for existence. And therefore, necessarily, they have to depend on something else. That's just how, by definition, that's how it works, right? So it still doesn't actually, so
it can be argued that these quantum interactions, these sort of events that occur, which require some type of observation, I guess the observation event could be classified as an act of someone more sort of a higher power.
Possibly, possibly. I mean,
possibly.
Yeah.
I mean, I could see that being an argument of someone who may believe in God.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah. You've read it. Have you read anything else from like potential other atheists that have any arguments you want to discuss?
A lot of the atheist arguments are mainly just trying to disprove the Bible verses and saying how you can't fit all the animals in the world on a stupid ark. Those kind of arguments, and those are sort of the weaker ones. Like, why are you focusing on an ark out of all the things? Like, I mean, it's a funny story.
Those kind of arguments sort of diverge from the theological and more about like the historical and all that sort of stuff. I think those ones kind of contest the nature of a divine creator rather than its existence, like kind of like who's right sort of thing of humanity. That's what those arguments sort of show. And I think what the essence is of those arguments is probably to show that, look, your idea of a creator is so convoluted and strange and foreign that how could such a thing even exist? So I think that's the kind of the root of those sort of arguments in terms of disproving a creator, is that they try and point out the rational and unintuitiveness of a divine being from whatever narrative perspective you take, whether it's biblical or Islamic, etc. They try and prove that in order to show that the creator is somehow irrational, and then somehow that leads on to it not existing, which isn't really a solid argument, because proving that one perspective might be irrational does not lead to the idea that a God doesn't exist. It may lead to the idea that that certain concept of a God may be incorrect or incomplete.
Yeah, and it's classic stuff that we learn in RS, is that the idea of a literal and metaphorical interpretations. Yeah, and how you can take perhaps Noah's Ark is not a thing. God didn't actually flood the earth. It's a story that can perhaps allow a Christian to learn more about the nature of God, or learn certain values that can help them be a better Christian, whatever. Ideas like that. For example, Hinduism have very, very interesting stories that may not seem plausible. Avatars of gods that have like a lion head or something. It sounds quite improbable when it comes to nature. Any sort of atheist can pick it up. Like, so you're telling me it's anatomically possible for a guy to have an elephant head, or look Ganesh? Like, that's not what it doesn't matter if a guy has an elephant head or not. It's what the Hindu learns from these kind of stories and the significance of the elephant head and things like this that add to the religion and make up the religion.
Yeah, I think
not just
just to add to what you said. Yeah, I think there is a distinction to be made between kind of the overall aims of religion and kind of humanity as a whole, and kind of the mind-independent truth. Because there can only be one sort of mind-independent truth. Either there's one God, either there's multiple gods, either there's no God, etc. Only one of those can actually be right. But however, when we abstract that into how is that going to affect our daily lives and how we behave, the truth is that we're all on this earth for like similar reasons, to kind of create positivity, to create a better place for us to live in. And that's kind of one thing that joins all religions together. So not to disregard what the truth is entirely, and to not have discussions and be like, oh, it doesn't matter what the truth is, it can be both. But to sort of realize that regardless of what the truth actually is, our joint goal is to create a better world as humans, as a collective. And then how to do that, that's like that's the human project, how we get that done.
Exactly.
But that's like one of the main things of just life, isn't it? You got to learn to work with people who you might disagree with on a fundamental level. Yeah. What do you think, Omar?
No, I agree. I mean, really, just summarised it well. I don't think I've got anything else to say with that as like what Hamza was saying. Summarised it perfectly, to be honest. Obviously there's...
It's why disputes over religion are the most stupid thing, because every single religion is built upon certain simple, very limited number of core beliefs and a certain way of life that aims for them to be better people and for them to create a better world. And from this, as more complexities add on, they start to differ, right? You start to get different cultures, different practices, different beliefs. But if you boil it all down to the key beliefs, right? Boil it all down to what the crux of each religion is. The amount of similarities that you find is so crazy that it almost seems like we tend to dispute on the differences so much that we don't realize how much of it is similar, and we must celebrate the similarities more than beef about the difficulties. You get me?
No, I agree.
I agree 100%. But I think even though that is the case, I think it's important to try and have these discussions like we're doing now. To see what's the fundamental truth, as Hamza called it. But no, I agree. Every religion, has similar principles. similar, for example, guidelines. It's just a matter of fundamental difference between whether you believe in one God or no God or multiple or whatever it may be, right? So, but yeah, no, definitely I agree with what you're saying as a whole. Yeah, 100%. But yeah.
Yeah, and of course, atheists are probably going to be looking at this video like, I'm not convinced.
Yeah.
So, what other arguments have we got for them?
In terms of proving that a creator exists, or
a creator, or eternal power exists. Because Omar, I know you have like a ton of sort of arguments in your bag.
I mean, potentially. let's see what Hamza has to say first, and then maybe I can give one argument. One argument. Cool.
Yeah.
I guess I tend to use the cosmological argument, sort of the idea of cause and effect, that there must be a cause of the universe because everything we observe has a cause, and to have an infinite series of causes would mean we have an infinite past, which would be philosophically problematic. Therefore, there has to be one necessary cause that is omnipotent, because it would have to be in charge and manage over everything, every aspect of existence. And that's the broad brushstrokes of that argument. But yeah, that's how I would go about it. But I think, yeah, in terms of arguing with an atheist, I think the argument you use or the way you phrase it really depends on who you're talking to and what situation you're in. That's why I'm being quite general. And I think one thing that might be, this is not really an argument for the existence of a creator, but one thing that might be important to emphasize is that, like similar to how religions share that same goal, atheists too share that same goal of trying to create a better world, as a general rule at least, and that's usually because of the innate dispositions of humans to sort of want to create better things, or to want to not have chaos, basically. So maybe a better way to create unity would be to emphasize the fact that we share the same emotional palette. Every human shares the same emotional palette. We all live in this world, etc. But yeah, in terms of the argument itself for proving the existence of a creator, I'll let Omar go into specifics because I think he'll be better at this than I am. But
I think it's difficult to just bring up arguments out of nowhere. Let's say we take a typical atheist and what they would argue, like someone like Ben Shapiro or someone like Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins is, he hates the idea of God, etc. So, what would you say to that, Omar? What's his argument?
Countering what argument? Which arguments am I countering, or am I proposing something?
I don't know. Are you familiar with what they say? Because I know.
I mean, main arguments, include science versus religion, which is again, I think, something that's a myth. I mean, me personally as a Muslim, I don't see how science can potentially contradict religion. I mean, I think they're two separate studies or fields. Science deals with the how, religion attempts to deal with the why. They deal with different subject matters, and people like Richard Dawkins try and use and weaponize science, like evolution, this, and which is, by the way, not something that we potentially don't believe in. I mean, there's no reason as to why not. Potentially entirely possible. And in fact, evolution is observed in the gut. I mean, it's just a fact, essentially. But what he attempts to do is conflate stuff like evolution and the theories of evolution. So he chooses particular theories, right? So particular ways of which... So evolution is, biological change over time. And there are different ways as to how people have explained how that happens. So one of which was Darwin. And he attempts to use Darwin's explanation as the true, all-finding explanation, all explanatory way, when there are plenty of other people have come before and after him who have attempted to explain the same mechanism. I mean, that just shows the problem of using science as a truth-finding mechanism. I mean, everyone has their own theory. How do you know your own theory is true, right? Even though we can see evolution, we can observe it, but the theory itself, how do you know it's true? With regards to arguments, I mean, I tend to use, if people really want to go down the philosophical kind of end of it, I tend to use one particular one, and it's not to do with cause and effect, it's to do with dependency. So I've used this term kind of over and over again throughout this discussion. I think I just need to define what it is. So dependency is just the idea that you You require something else in order to exist, right? So a tree depends on sunlight, and the sun depends on, I don't know, the universal constants in order to exist, and the universe depends on, therefore, something else. So this argument that there are two types of existence, or three types really, mainly, an impossible one, so, you know, squared circles, as you know, they can never exist. These things just don't exist, right? They're impossible. And then I would say, you know, there's something called a possible and a necessary existence. So these are the terms, again, I've been using, I need to define. So a possible existence is just an ordinary thing, a dependent thing, right? It needs something else in order to exist. A t-shirt, for example, could be black, could be grey, could be red. It needs something else in order to exist. Someone has to have made it, and that person that made it requires something else, and so on, right? And you have necessary, which is the idea that it's independent. It doesn't need anything else in order to exist, right? It's always existed, right? It's opposite to the possible. So the possible doesn't always have to exist, and it requires something else. And necessary always existed, and doesn't need anything else in order to exist, right? So the argument is simple, right? So how can there be only a chain of possible existences? Do you get what I'm trying to say, Dinesh? Yeah. So how can...
It's another regression.
Yeah, exactly. So if there's only possible existences, you just have an infinite chain of dependency, which is impossible. It's an infinite regress fallacy, right? You're depending on something forever. So there wouldn't be any existence in the first place. So it's necessary to put in an independent existence somewhere down the line. I don't know. I'm not claiming to know where that thing is, but I'm just saying that thing is there to stop the fallacy from happening. And then, of course, you get down to the properties of that thing. So if it's independent, it's always existed, therefore it's eternal. Everything depends upon it, and yet it depends upon nothing because it's just there. Like if you imagine, like the analogy I like to use is the pool, right? There's a pool analogy. So you standing outside the pool, you can see the water is level, right? But that means that somewhere there is going to be a floor, right? Otherwise the water wouldn't be level; it would just keep sinking, right? So that's a similar kind of analogy to think about it like that. So that's what I would use. Yeah. Obviously, and the whole discussion is if they've accepted that, then you go into the properties, and it takes quite a bit of time, but yeah.
So let's go into the properties.
Okay, yeah.
So first, what I wanted to ask was, what do you think? Because when we think of God, we imagine them as a person almost. We always have an idea. Humans have always thought of God as human, sort of features of a human, almost, and we always go back to imagining them as having a head and 2 arms, 2 legs, and so on. I don't know why we initially went to that. For example, in Hinduism, we have pictures and deities and stuff, and the reason why they exist is because they're symbolic of certain features of God for us to sort of imagine. So it's not like it's blasphemous for us to imagine God being limited to like a human form. Like, oh gosh, no, it's not what it is. It's about what that is. It's all about symbolism, representation, and stuff. But Islam, you're not supposed to have deities and stuff. And
Islam sort of takes a strong stance against what we call idolatry, and as to the reasons, I think it's due to the fact that it's reductive in a sense that God is not like any of these things that are human that we experience, because he's unique, and he's independent of everything. And to be symbolized by anything physical would be to take away from the fact that he is independent of anything. I think that's a simple reason why Islam is against idolatry. Yeah, and I get your symbolic aspect, because having symbols can help someone connect.
Plus
go on.
Sorry, the the ideas of God also differ slightly. I think that's the reason why Islam doesn't have idols, but Hinduism does, because the Hindu God, we sort of imagine it as a eternal soul. So we imagine everything being part of an eternal soul. So it's a very complicated. It's a bit harder to explain what God is when it comes to Hinduism and other religions, but due to that sort of idea of God, it allows. Makes sense for us to use deities to sort of imagine these different things in the natural world to be different parts of God and so on. So due to that distinction, I think is why Hinduism has idols and Islam doesn't. But that's not something to dwell on. But
I think that's quite interesting, the idea of distinguishing different aspects of God through symbolism. Because interestingly enough, Islam is a similar thing, not through symbolism, but through names, in which different aspects of God is represented. So there's a thing in Islam called the 99 names of Allah. So Allah has a distinct set of 99 names, each of which emphasize a different characteristic of God. And these names are literally just written words, and there's no physical representation. But I think that serves that same purpose of being representative of different characteristics of God without conflating it with physical things and things that are limited and trapped. So here we can see two religions both trying to express the same aspect with slightly different nuances in how it's kind of approached. So yeah, what do you think of that, having names instead of physical things to both reduce the idea of limitations whilst also maintaining the fact that God can have different aspects if you must use that word?
Yeah, it's weird because the end result is the same thing, The end result is the exact same, and it's once again it comes down to how we're all doing the same things, doing it in slightly different ways, Omar, what do you think about the sort of
about the names and the
distinction between sort of names and using sort of, for example, Krishna. I have a painting of Krishna on my wall, and Krishna is sort of, he has so many different he's done so much in Hindu mythology, Hindu stories, and as a avatar of Vishnu himself, that he has he has many arms. In pictures you'll see Hindu gods have many different arms and they all hold something, and it's not that these men are just walking around on earth having like 10 arms. That's it, it's not that. It's just each arm holding something is symbolic of something else. It represents a different story, and I can see the 99 names of Allah being the same, sort of achieving the same thing,
Yeah, because what I was going to say is, like, for us, God is something that one can't really imagine or picture. It's unlike anything that you see in existence. So for us, this is just our point of view. We say that, trying to depict him is sort of it's kind of limiting, as Hamza's touched upon. It's kind of... you're essentially limiting his power and his infinite kind of nature, and so doing that is not something that we do, right? So, potentially I can see both sides, but I think they both do achieve the same goal. But like I said, for us, it's just the idea that we can't imagine him just because it's a being that's just so unlike anything that we've ever seen or could potentially imagine. That names for us.
I think. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I was going to say. I think the main reason why this idea of not depicting God exists in Islam is so that we don't get this idea of the middleman or the intermediary. So essentially, what I'm saying is that what Islam is saying, is that that every human being has an intrinsic connection to this ultimate divine being, and it's a personal intrinsic connection that is not interfered with by anything. There's no symbol. There's nothing in the way of them connecting to this sort of divine being. So the reason why that idea is so paramount is because, first of all, I guess it emphasizes the individuality of everyone, because there's a contemporary fear that, or maybe not even contemporary, just a fear that humans have of being sort of lost in the world, in a sense that we have no purpose, or we don't belong in any place. Even when we're with other people, we kind of feel this idea of isolation and solipsism being the idea that you can only know what's in your own mind. So the remedy to that, in my humble opinion, is that identifying the fact that we all have this personal connection with a divine creator or divine being, or even if you're atheist, we all have a personal connection to a spiritual aspect of our own being. And I think acknowledging that without having any intermediary, anything in the middle of it, is very important, just because it emphasizes the fact that we're not alone, actually. And the truth is that there is something out there, whatever you believe it is, there is something out there that is kind of looking out for you in that sense. Yeah.
And just to add to what Hamza was saying, actually, when Hamza's describing, there's a connection between, God and man, right? In Islam, we call that the fitrah, and actually, there is something that can prove, or not, or try to prove. There is some sort of a proof for it. If you actually Google Justin Barrett, he's a researcher, and he did a research project kind of with Oxford University, I'm pretty sure it was, over a 3-year period, and essentially, he did find that there was an innate predisposition to believing in God. So children, essentially, who weren't exposed to this idea of religion, had an innate belief in some sort of supernatural creator, whether you want to call that God or whatever you want to call it, really. So I think that's just an interesting kind of thing you can read about if you want to.
So it's almost intuitive.
Yeah, so it's kind of instinctual, right? Or just inbuilt, right? So yeah, Justin Barrett, if you want to Google him. It's quite interesting. Yeah, it's quite interesting, yeah. It's nice. But yeah, that's all I've got to say really about that.
Something that rang a bell at me when Hamza was saying, how each human, basically everything has some type of connection to God, that some spiritual sort of part of them being connected to God and stuff. That idea, there's always something in every single religion that you observe that sort of portrays this idea. I don't know loads about Islam myself, but for Christianity, there's the Holy Spirit, I think, can be seen as the idea of that connection between the human and the God. In Hinduism, which I know a little bit more about, is by definition, we sort of all imagine our souls being part of the Paramatmas, our souls, they're all sort of part of a larger eternal soul. It's difficult to explain in English, anyways, but it's that connection, that sort of a spiritual connection. You observe it in so many different ways in religion. It goes back to sort of appreciating the similarities between all these different religions.
Yeah.
No, I mean I agree, to be honest. I think you summed it up perfectly for me anyway. What about you, Hamza? What do you think?
Yeah, because I think we keep coming back to this point of unity, and that everyone's got a shared common goal. So I think that's definitely something to focus on. I guess the more heated face of this argument, I guess I can think of two more controversial, more one that sort of gets the emotions of people going is what is that mind independent truth, and then secondly, what is the impact of religion on the world objectively? Does it cause more benefit or does it cause more harm, more tribalism, more disunity? So it's those two things, I think, that stem from sort of these spiritual beliefs that do cause a lot of both theological and physical issues within the world in terms of people having conflicts with one another. So maybe it might be interesting to go into those. So let's start with the idea of religion being a negative impact on the world. So what do you guys think of that? Just in terms of what a person who would disagree with me and say a religion is negative, what kind of things would they say or bring up in order to support that sort of argument?
So I think the main arguments are really religion is used to control the masses. I'm sure you've heard this a lot, which is true to an extent. I would argue it is true to an extent, but does that mean is the action of individuals trying to manipulate religion, or is it the religion itself? I mean, that's where you have to make that distinction, right? So, for example, anything really, it could be applied to anyone and anything who's doing something in the name of religion. Does that religion truly teach what they are doing, whether that be terrorism or anything, or is it the person? I think that's an important distinction to make. Other arguments include, that religion has kind of taken us backwards or inhibited scientific development. That's just another common argument that's really, really used among atheists. I mean, again, is that really true? I mean, if you look at, for example, since we're on the topic of Islam, look at the Islamic Golden Age. Look at people like Ibn Sina. Look at people like Ibn Rushd. Al-Ghazali, guys that not only polymaths, but someone like Ibn Sina, his textbook, his medical encyclopedia, as he called it, it was used by the Europeans up till the 18th century. 19th century. So, I mean, is it really fair to make such arguments? I mean, these are just like common arguments that I would say that are just emotional, whether that be because you've been directly affected or simply just latching on to a generalization. I think that's the more common thing, like theme. But really, they don't. I think they're more on the weaker side of the arguments, in my opinion. I mean, I don't know. What do you think, Dinesh?
Yeah, I agree, definitely. And I'm also thinking, in terms of disputes between different religions, and how one can argue against religions and the effect that it has on the world, is because a person may say that, oh, because of the varying beliefs that humans have, this naturally causes different people of different beliefs to sort of argue, and it's within human nature for certain disputes, conflicts to occur, and that the existence of these religions are the root of these types of conflicts occurring and stuff. But my idea, how I interpret that, is that one, as I said earlier, the similarities are not being celebrated. Secondly, it's never been a part of religion to sort of dismiss or have to sort of conflict with other types of beliefs. That was never any part of religion. It was never a thing. It's something that's evolved into human nature. Oh, this guy's different. Oh, it's probably evil. He doesn't believe in what I believe. Let's burn this man alive.
That's I get what you mean. That's quite an interesting idea though, because in the Quran it does actually talk about conflict and stuff, and I think it's important to note that whilst religions don't propagate violence, and they don't want their overall sort of end goal is not to have a violent society, a chaotic society, to have a peaceful one. I think it's still important to acknowledge the role of violence and also like when violence has to become part of the situation, because the sad thing is that violence is actually a part of our world. It's not something we can completely eradicate because people make mistakes. People are naturally emotional. Emotions lead to sort of conflict and etc. So the core of a religion can and oftentimes is about the unity. But I guess it's kind of like you don't want to forget about the fact that violence still exists, and violence is still a thing that you have to manage. What do you guys think about that? Because
I like
we
that
can't
idea a lot.
ignore, because go on.
The importance of violence. For example, in Hinduism, we have the Mahabharata is an epic. It's the longest poem probably in history, and it's an epic. I believe. I think it's like the best story ever written, in my opinion. It's so amazing. Of course, that's partly just patriotism, but there is a massive war, the Kurukshetra war at the end. War, of course, is violence. In the Ramayana, for example, my guy Ram shoots an arrow at Ravan and kills him. It's violence, but they're meant to represent something, obviously. There's an idea that, you learn from some types of violence. As much as there is, ahimsa is so big in Hinduism, even people may observe it as being ironic that there's certain wars that exist in Hinduism. It's not that these wars mean that, Hinduism is a violent religion. It's that wars reflecting of human nature, there's something to learn out of them. They're meant to mean something,
A funny little example that you just reminded me of is like in the video game God of War. You guys played it?
Yeah.
So there's a bit where it's like he talks about the reason why there's talking about some other god, and the reason why he was the god of war was because he was able to manage everyone peacefully so that he could control whenever a war happened. And I thought that was a very interesting subversion, that war and peace come hand in hand, and if you control one, then you actually control the other, and they can't really be separated. So if you're in control of peace, then ironically you're also in control of war, and if you're in control of war, then ironically you're also in control of peace, because they're two kind of opposite sides of the coin.
Yeah, like one is a last resort of the other. So
that is really
war
interesting.
So war being a very ultimate, last resort. Like you want to maintain peace 99% of the time, but like Hamza was saying, you're in control. So if you manage to lose control, you resort to that 1%, which is war, unfortunately, which is just a sad reality.
And the very interesting thing actually is that people who attack religion on this front of saying that it's violent, it's warlike. I'm speaking particularly from the context of Islam, as it's something that's very prominent today as well. Ironically, both the people who are against Islam and say that it's all about war and they cherry pick the ayahs, they exactly. Ironically they take the same position as the people who are ignorant, who are ignorant, 100%. And also they also cherry pick those ayahs and use them to justify their violence from their perspective. So it's like you have these two extremes which are so opposed to one another, and yet ironically they're agreeing with each other on their interpretation of Islam, and it's so strange to get your head around, because they're both wrong at the end of the day. They're both like sort of taking a narrow-minded view of what constitutes religion, and they sort of negate the holistic sort of interpretation. Yeah, just a plethora of like misinterpretation. You know, putting in your own agenda behind like the mix. You know, and no, it's fine. Yeah, go ahead. What are you going to say? I was going to talk about how that idea links to critical thinking. Critical thinking is something that I'm sure we all have. But it's something that is can be sort of shunned in particular aspects. So I'm going to talk specifically from an Islamic perspective because that's what I know. But there is a sort of culture within Islam where critical thinking is withheld and sort of contained within the ivory tower of scholarships and scholars of the past. And I think we need to break that stigma of the idea that only people who are at the top of or the most intellectual can even begin to attempt to interpret the Quran and Hadith. And I think that needs to be challenged, because at the end of the day, we're all critical thinkers. I think we can agree that most people in this group right now, everyone here is a critical thinker. Sorry, I was like gearing myself up to cuss someone. That would not be very nice. I'm saying that. Okay, I'm going to say that everyone in our school, let's say for example, I would argue is either A, a critical thinker, or B, on their way to becoming a critical thinker. And that to be able to release that potential is something that we have to acknowledge before we can even try to begin that sort of journey of critical thinking. And I think just to wrap this up, one issue that people see with religions is that it's destructive towards critical thinking. And that actually has been the case in the past, especially with if you take into account the Christian Empire, the sort of what's the word? The clergy? Yeah, that sort of was destructive towards critical thinking, because what it did was it restricted the access to materials, to religious materials, and to education to only a certain select group of people who could then dictate what opinions are being like sort of promoted, and that's something that we have to sort of work against, especially in our contemporary age where misinformation is just sort of rife.
That's really interesting, because it's an idea. It's like this. I want to take the Golden Age of mathematics in the context of Islam, as well as sort of the birth of the Vedas and stuff in terms of Hinduism. So the first Veda of Hinduism, it focuses a lot on universal truth and ideas of finding what the meaning of life is. They wanted to solve everything right from the beginning. The smartest people, the smartest Hindus, 4,000 years ago, when the Vedas came into existence, and this sort of stimulated it. Brought up sort of ideas of mathematics being born. We have astrology, astronomy being incorporated into it. Hindu Ayurveda, for example, medicine. All of this. I want to think that all came from the idea of critical thinking promoted by the initial. It's in the context of Hinduism, for the initial sort of thirst for knowledge and the ability to think. And Islam, for example, plays such a massive role in accelerating the advancement of mathematics over the Golden Age. I don't know loads about the Golden Age of mathematics myself, but I know Islam had a lot to do with it. And this idea of critical thinking is sort of opposing the idea that it obstructs sort of advancement of knowledge, because what it did is accelerate human knowledge and advancement of human civilization. It literally began intelligent civilization, is what I'd like to think.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that's 100% true. And with regards to, like what Hamza was saying, people attack religion on the front of, is trying to inhibit, or religion's trying to inhibit critical thinking, and that, that it all goes down to the same, concept of religion's used to control the masses. I mean, to an extent, like Hamza was saying, it is kind of true. I mean, it's seen across all religions, not just Christianity or Hinduism or Islam, all across all different worldviews. But
actually, I think I think I'd go a step further. Not just isolate religions in this example. I think it's seen across all power.
Exactly. That's what I was gonna. Yeah.
So even if you can go there, Nick. Keep going.
Yeah. So I was gonna say, like this is seen not just across religion, but actually just in general, across empires, across just powerful nations. Ideas of censorship, and I mean these things aren't limited and restricted; they're universal. And so I think it's kind of unfair to pinpoint religion and say, this is the work of religion, when it's just, in my opinion, people using religion to manipulate others, and that's just, I think, that's what I think. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So that concludes this episode. So thank you to Hamza and thank you to Omar for featuring in this.
Yeah, thank you. Exactly. Thank you for having us.
So that's it.